Hi, with each episode we're proving how incredible 1999 was games-wise. And ladies and gentlemen, this one's no different. Black Moon Chronicles is a turn-based / real-time fantasy strategy hybrid that plays like a mixture of Heroes of Might and Magic and Warhammer Dark Omen, leaning much more towards the latter. And it's a pretty decent and innovative title, even if one that does not do much special. The Empire is at risk of destruction, oh no, not the Empire. An evil archmage, Haskell Thorn, has gathered huge armies of orcs, trolls, undead and demons, and plans to use them to take over the entire kingdom. You play as Mechwarrior, a half-elf lord who, after going through a rather short introductory campaign, has got to decide which of the four sides of the conflict to ally himself with. So there's the Empire, the Order of Justice, the Knights of Light, and naturally the Army of the Black Moon. As it's easy to guess, the first three more or less represent the good and the last is the evil. Kinda like my boss's wife, but much less so. And the choice is not purely cosmetic, but serves as separate and different campaigns for all of the sides. The entire gameplay mechanics is split twofold. First is turn-based mode, in which you move around your armies on the map and manage your castle. Castle, in which you can recruit units to your active armies, research new types of them and acquire spells and abilities. Battles start when you or the enemy enters any of the special places on the map, like villages, cities or potentially defended spots like temples for instance, or when armies meet. Combat takes place on separate battlefields and is entirely real-time with an active pause. And let me tell you, it's something. Some of those larger battles can literally have thousands of units in them. And in 1999, it was not something you would expect to see in most games. There's around 70 different units in the game, split into 4 groups of infantry, archers, cavalry and faction-specific like dragons, giants, behemoths and the likes, and they're all divided between 4 main and few neutral factions. Each of the soldiers in your army has its own experience and based on it also their own combat capabilities. During battles, units are split into regiments, each led by its own standard bearer, whose influence on the morale is fundamental, which is something worth keeping in mind when sending your troops to battle, same as it is when attacking enemy armies. Black Moon Chronicles is fun if you're a fan of RTS and fantasy alike, but I feel that the importance of a caster and special units has been heavily inflated because you can gauge the difficulty of most battles against AI solely based on number of these units that they have in their army. Still, if you're into the genre, this one's definitely not to skip. Disney's Tarzan is a 3D side-view platformer based on Disney's IP of the same name. And naturally, as it's easy to guess, you play as the titular hero. That said, as the game begins you're still an orphan child adopted by the gorillas, so you're no hero at all. And you must learn all different skills from them, such as climbing trees, swinging on the branches and fighting small and aggressive wild animals. As you progress through the game though, our hero grows up, becomes an adult and will have to protect himself and his wild jungle brethren from the hunters led by the evil man known as Clayton. The game is composed out of 14 different levels, in which you'll swing around the jungle and fight different enemies. Your main means of fighting are the fruit projectiles that can be thrown over and underhand for different distances and come in 4 different power levels, marked by their colors. Knife, spear and parasol are available in some stages too, as means for close combat no less, but they're not something you'll be sporting through your entire adventure, so it's best that you master that fruit throwing fast. Practice at home if you have to, before playing the game. After all, a good coconut throw to the head is as effective as a man raised by the gorillas could hope that it would be. And the only question that remains unanswered is where does he keep all the fruit that he keeps throwing, cause it sure as hell ain't in his pockets. The enemies are mostly animals, so monkeys, baboons, eagles, leopards, snakes, bush pigs and the likes, and occasionally a human hunter. Other than fighting and platforming, our jungle-raised hero encounters many different pickups, for instance bananas that refill his health bar, coins that grant extra lives when 100 of them is collected, sketch pieces that unlock bonus stages when 4 are found, and letters forming word Tarzan that are used to display secret scenes from the movie. While Tarzan is definitely not the easiest of the platformers out there, it's not unfair and you can't compare it to some of the Disney's earlier releases like The Lion King for instance, which felt like a punishment incarnate in a digital form at times, especially in its infamous can't wait to be the king level. No such occurrences in Tarzan, so if you're at least a little bit platforming savvy, completing the game while enjoying it along the way should not pose too big of a challenge. Well, maybe apart from the birds, why there are so many goddamn birds in Tarzan. Star Trek Starfleet Command is a tactical, strategic ship-to-ship combat simulator set in the world of Star Trek and based on the tabletop wargame Starfleet Battles. It's a very unique game at that, as it doesn't really use story-based campaign, but stretches over 30 years of your quote-unquote Space Navy career using random missions generator for each of the 6 playable factions: the United Federation of Planets, the Romulan Star Empire, the Klingon Empire, the Orion Pirates, the Lyran Empire, the Hydran Kingdom, and the Gorn, each of them having their own ships with their own technologies, components, crew members, and best combat strategies. All that said, all of these have special elite organizations within them that, when joined as the game progresses, will unlock a short chain of story-centric scripted missions. It's a drop in a bucket though, so doesn't change the main random nature of gameplay too much. While there is an overarching theme of having to figure out the effect of a space race known as Organians living head on the known universe, it's not something you'll be really tackling, and it's in a far backseat of everything else that happens in the game. Like the very last seats on the bus, you know, where cool kids sit. Most of the missions that you'll partake in your long-ass career will have unique and interesting objectives other than the combat alone. And there may be escorts, patrols, space monster investigations, starbase assaults, interactions with specific aliens, ships, planets, and many more. You start in a small frigate-class ship, but as you complete assignments, earning prestige, you'll be able to spend it on larger ships, upgrades, and better crew, effectively keeping the game flow entertaining and with something to aim for all throughout it. There are literal dozens of different ships in the game and hundreds of ship modes for them too. So while stuff like phasers, photon torpedoes, disruptors and shield generators are well known and something every Star Trek fan would expect from such a game, there's more of this included and some are really obscure, and stuff that only real Trekkies would appreciate. I mean, I love Star Trek and would love to consider myself a Trekkie, but I'm nowhere near as knowledgeable about it as some of those Star Trek-centric channels are, and I always watch their videos in amazement how much they manage to gather from each and every episode. And it's stuff I usually overlook, or it goes over my head, being mentioned once or twice in the entire series. Anyway, back to our game, which, funny enough, for all the fun combat that it offers, is really in essence just a balancing act of having to quickly juggle ship's energy resources between all the weapons, shields, ECMs, tractor beams, shield reinforcements and the likes, so that you would keep your crew safe and enemy ships unalive and or disabled. And yeah, I know there's no such word as unalive, but it sounds Federation appropriate in my head, and I love what the Federation stands for. Today, Starfleet Command is best played in its Gold Edition, which offers the game in its final, patched version and all the additional previously downloadable missions in a one neat package. So if you're a fan of Star Trek, or anything I said about the game sounds like a potential fun way to spend an afternoon to you, make sure to seek it out. I was never a fan of Mechwarrior games, and truth be told, other than Robot Jacks or robotics movies, I was not a fan of mechs in any media they were in. And yes, that kind of, sorta, not really but still yeah, includes Transformers. I don't care much for them. So there may be very little emotion here on my side, but please know that not caring doesn't mean not being able to appreciate them for what they are. And Mechwarrior 3 most definitely was the best game in its genre upon its release. I just realized that some of you may actually not know what Mechwarrior is, so let me quickly explain. It's a real-time first-person huge mechanized, mostly bipedal vehicle combat simulator. While all the stars of the show are naturally all the 18 mechs included in the game, you play as a pilot of one and can take it for a spin in a campaign composed out of 20 missions. There are dozens of various components, projectile and energy weapons that you can fit on your robot, and they differ in power and accuracy quite considerably. Some of those bigger and more deadlier ones also tend to heat up quite fast, so you'll either have to juggle your armament mid-combat or, well, stand in the water. Yup, its magical properties make it life-sustainable for other creatures than biological only. Anyway, you'll naturally fight against other mechs, tanks, choppers, defensive installations and a whole manner of other traditional military units. Big part of the game is customization and arming/preparing of your giants for each encounter, which may and will make or break your game. Well, unless you know how to cheese it, the game that is, and it's with lasers if you wondered. Because you know, the laser beam travels at the speed of light, but also there is a gold spot somewhere around a kilometer from your target where you can literally shoot limbs off of opposing mechs and never have their AI realize that they're being attacked. So they happily continue on their patrol paths as you disassemble them piece by piece. Sure, it's an overlooking on the designer's side and should not be used while playing, but it's there, it's working, so I say it's fair game. You control up to 3 squad mates during campaign, issuing them very basic but oh so helpful in the battle commands of attack, move or return to mobile field base for repairs. And yes, if you've not played other games than the first 2 Mechwarriors, then mobile field bases are something new to you. And they're like your ammo and armor resupply dispensers that also provide repairs functionality. They go through each mission with you and advance whenever you order them to. Since your mechs have no shields but just armor, these bases can be crucial in your progression, so should be kept either away from combat zones or well protected. Mechanically that's it, and Mechwarrior 3 was definitely the best of them all upon its release. But in terms of story, it's the same old we saw in dozen other games. So you're a mech pilot working for the Inner Sphere and you're sent on a mission of counterattack to the planet Tranquil to get rid of smoke jaguars once and for all. An orc and not the animals. On the first glance it appears to be a simple attack, destroy and run type of an op, until one of your dropships is hit by smoke jaguar defenses, and falls like a drunk after one too many, quickly and unexpectedly with a big boom, straight to the ground. And suddenly you're left with your team scattered and you having to find them, complete your original objective and find the way of the planet. Silver is a fantasy action game, let's call it a role-playing for the sake of this preview, taking place in a fictional island region of Jara, commonly known as the Wheel of Life, for the fact that it's oval in shape. Jara is ruled by an evil sorcerer Silver, residing on an island of blood. Pretty cool name for the island, though one has to wonder about the genesis of it and nothing good comes to mind. The game begins with Silver deciding to take a new bride, and as most crazed villains in both our history and gaming, he goes over the top with the plan, and orders his armies to find and kidnap all the women in the Wheel of Life and bring them to him so that he could pick the one that he'd find most desirable, whatever that may be in his perverse mind. I suppose that when you're well-known bad guy, one terrorizing and ruling a country no less, and living on an island the name of is rather gruesome, chances of any women going to meet you voluntarily are rather slim. So, while terrible, one has to appreciate his ingenuity in solving the issue. Anyway, he did just that and kidnapped all of them. You're playing as David, and your wife Jennifer was among the ones taken away when you were in the forest chasing fairies, picking mushrooms or whatever the else one does in fantasy forest, possibly collecting gummy berries or seeking smurfs. Upon discovering what transpired, you're consumed by rage. You're like more pissed in that moment than you've ever been. Even more than that time when you paid for an ale in a tavern and realized that it was cut with water and that was on your bad hair day. So you know, you're on the edge. You quickly decide to save your beloved and set off to meet with a group you've only heard of in rumors and one supposedly opposing the Silver and wanting to dethrone the tyrant. As you go through your adventure fighting Silver's goons and working your way towards the evil ruler, you learn of the prophecy that says that Silver could only ever be defeated by collecting of 8 magic spheres of fire, ice, earth, lightning, poison, regeneration, time and light. So, while the game begins with your personal strategy, it grows into a national one to eventually graduate into a full-on good versus evil encounter. And you're the star of the show. I mean, David is, but you play as him, so yeah, you know, you're the one to save the Wheel of Life. You're the hero. Mechanically, during gameplay, you control only one chosen character in your adventuring party and the rest is handled by the AI. The combat is entirely real-time as opposed to popular at the time active pose or turn-based, which is a fresh take, but also its hack and slashing proved how little of a RPG the game actually is, as you only ever get experience for the most challenging fights and can change your gear and pick up spells that you use. Other than that, it feels like an interesting take on the action-adventure at best. It may be controversial opinion, but it's the one I have, and also it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with the game, because there isn't, it's fun and definitely worth a playthrough. Close Combat 3: The Russian Front is a third in its own series computer historical wargame set mainly in the Eastern Front during World War II. It depicts grand majority of this part of the war seen from both sides of the conflict, starting with so-called Operation Barbarossa, so invasion of Soviet Union, all the way to the final battle for Berlin in 1945. And same as its predecessors, it's naturally a real-time strategy, but not what you think of when you think of a typical RTS, so there's no base building, no research, no resource gathering, and definitely no Zerg rushes. Though some of those daring tactical maneuvers could probably be considered Zerg rushes. Close Combat 3 was made from ground up to be as historically accurate as possible, and I gotta say that they've aced it. Dozens if not hundreds of unit types, all their weapons, gear and clothing, the terrain, everything is recreated in painstaking detail, it's amazing. So, not being able to erect a few buildings or cut down a local forest is not an issue at all, if you keep in mind that you'll get a chance to change the history, for better or worse. Though if you think about it, that change can only be for the worse in this particular case, so I don't know. Anyway, the weather conditions and time of the day change depending where and when the battle is set, and the battlefield conditions too are dependent on all of that. Units can be suppressed, pinned, they can regroup, surrender and even panic, and generally speaking, whatever is possible in real life during such conflict can happen in the game. The choice of the Eastern Front for the close combat free, in my not so humble opinion, was an excellent one, as by 1999 we had tons of games covering the Western or Pacific fronts, and it was about time that the other side of the war got some attention. Especially that the conflict on the East lasted for 4 years and featured many epic moments rarely mentioned in video gaming, like the largest tank battle in history for instance, which may not be recreated in the game, but is a good example of how rich the front was in terms of strategic possibilities that could be used in gaming. Graphics, as per usual in close combat games, are fantastic. Sure, they're not super detailed 3D, but all the units look the way they're supposed to, the terrain appears as realistic as it's possible in a top-down view in 1999, and all the guns and vehicles sound as they really did too. I think I've not been there to witness the conflict when it took place, and I'm not sure how accurate the movies showing it were. All in all, if you enjoy strategies, and especially those more realistic, Close Combat 3, despite some small issues with pathfinding AI, is a great game to get lost in. Flanker 2.0 is a direct sequel to Su-27 Flanker and a flight combat simulation focusing on Russian Su-27 and Su-33 respectively. And it's not a game for a Sunday pilot, I'm afraid, as it's packed with details to the brim. Or to the cockpit actually. Or better yet, to the flight stick. To the point that unless you're very versed with the genre, it may feel daunting and alienating at first. I mean, all of the cockpit switches, dials, sliders, all the instruments really, are in their original Russian, with no option to switch to English. So unless you know the language or are familiar with them, having played previous game extensively, it will take you a while to learn it. Fortunately, despite the very steep learning curve and high entry point, the tutorial is rather good and will get you flying comfortably in just a dozen or so hours. Well, flying much earlier than that, but a dozen seems reasonable for a comfortable flight, I feel. Upon its release, Flanker 2.0 and even more so its later patched and updated version 2.5 were both praised for the unparalleled realism of flight dynamics, physics and weaponry, which made it entirely inaccessible to players such as myself, who are good enough with the light flight simulations and arcade simulations too, but those incredibly true to real life are just something I could never wrap my head around. That said, if you manage to tackle the beast, learn how to tame it and then take advantage of it, you'll be in hell of a ride. It will be breathing fire, like all dragons do, albeit from its twin-engine backend, and it will look beautiful doing so. In fact, you could say that the creature's graphics are still very nice to this very day. The dungeons and dragons could take a little bit of a refresher, but the monster itself is a beauty. I'm not an avid flight sims gamer. I mean, I've played some, many in fact, but I was never very good at them, and the more realistic they get, the worse I did in them. So as you can imagine, this particular dragon is the one I never managed to best, and all the adventures I could have in it, fighting other dragons or even some catapults, were something I've never experienced myself. But I've read, saw and heard that when given a chance and time, this Sky Blue Lizard was unlike most others at the time. If you're a flight simulations veteran, Pokemon trainer or a professional dragon tamer, Flanker 2.0 is definitely one not to skip. Ooh, pinball! I know of at least 2 of you who love the genre. And well, we've got one game to talk about today. And since pinballs are notoriously difficult games to talk about without getting into each table's mechanics, this one's not going to be a long one, I'm afraid. Kinda like my career in video game design. It was an interesting year, few games came out on Android and iOS, none of them are available anymore, perhaps for the best I must add, and I work in hell now. At least it's not cold there. Anyway, Slamtilt Resurrection is exactly what the title says that it is. It's a resurrected old DOS and Amiga classic lifted to the presentation standards of 1999. Well, there's a catch, but we'll get to that in a minute. So the graphics are now high resolution, high color and in full 3D, which is not a feat that can be overlooked, as 2D pinballs games were well known for often using unrealistic mechanics that would be difficult or impossible to translate to real-life pinball machines. And yet, they've done it, and in style no less. But the catch I was talking about is that there are only 2 out of 4 original tables present in Resurrection, Night of the Demons and the Pirate, which is a bit disappointing, but I'm sure they had to be a valid reason, be it licensing or technical. Still, the 2 tables we've got are no slouches and can easily provide hours of fun. So the Pirate is naturally about all things swashbuckling, swords, eye patches, ships, sword fights, hidden treasures, barrels of grog and the buccaneering in its best form. It's also a very balanced table, offering simple ways of scoring big, and deeper, more complex mechanics that, while a bit more challenging, allow for changing those big scores into huge ones. Night of the Demons, in a traditional for the computer pinball manner when tackling the subject, is simpler on the first glance, with a lot of free space in the middle and plenty of ramps and places to score around it. I believe that the design choice for nightmare horror themed tables was started with the first Pinball Dreams, and most other demonic tables I've seen since then in other games followed this suit. Anyway, both tables look and play great and are definitely worth a look even today. Especially that while there are some glitches with the physics from time to time, overall the simulation aspect of Resurrection feels very realistic and enjoyable to play around with. Codename Eagle was my nickname in high school because I was fast like an eagle and also had a difficult name to pronounce, and coincidentally it's also a title of our next game. And only one of these two is true, but I'll let you figure this one out all by yourself. It's an open-ended plot-driven first-person shooter set in 1920s alternate history Russia, and it's a game that wanted to do so many different things you wouldn't believe, and lacked focus to do all of them justice, and as a result of that we've ended up with a very varied feature-wise game that's okay, but not something you'll be replaying or talking about with friends. Tsar of Russia has been assassinated in 1917, so naturally his son, Piotr, took over and grabbed the nation by the balls, introducing his Iron Fist reign, turning the country into one huge war-centric machine, or so it seemed. As in reality, it was a puppet doppelganger installed by the General Popov to act as the face of his as evil as ambitious claim for the world. All the while the real prince has been rescued and hidden away in safety. His memories were temporarily and partially erased so that he would not accidentally give himself away. In the meantime, the country armed itself to the teeth or more, maybe even to the brow, a unibrow no less, and quickly began overwhelming its neighbors with its power and sheer numbers. And as they do, nothing seems to be able to stop them and they take countries one by one. Fortunately, the more they conquer, the longer it takes them to grab each country, as the armies are stretched thin, and that leaves an opening, nay, chance, to stop them. Small as it may be, it's better than nothing. The remaining 3 countries in the world form an alliance with hopes of stopping the early 20th century superpower and bring peace back to the world. 10 years later, Prince Alexander, now known as Agent Red, is the best and most efficient of Alliance's agents and also a character you'll be playing as. And you'll be on series of action-packed linear missions fighting your way through the Russian army all the way to the Popov, who's in a Zeppelin and then bomber, believe it or not. And to get to him, not only you'll get to defeat hundreds if not thousands of enemies, but you also do it in style, utilizing different land, water and air vehicles over usually rather large levels. Codename Eagle is truly feature-packed, the enemies come in large variety, there's tons of weapons, and the usable vehicles are something that was unseen in most FPS games, and yet all of it feels as if it was put together over a weekend by devs eating pizzas, drinking beers and playing occasional Quake-free arena deathmatches. I mean, it's not a bad game, don't get me wrong, it just feels like every single one of those numerous things that it's composed of is lacking that last layer, last coat of paint to be what it was supposed to. It's still worth a playthrough, but once is more than enough. Darkstone is what is deeply and irremovably stuck in my boss's wife's chest instead of the heart, and it's as cold, evil, demonic and corrupted as she is. It's keeping her in the undead, rotten zombie-like state, not dead and not really living either. She roams the streets terrorizing our town and local businesses, with her ungodly presence spreading hate and prejudice everywhere she shows up. I mean, listen to me, I too am corrupted already and poisoned by her, with incurable hate and despise. Fortunately, it's directed towards her only, but I fear that it may eventually progress as most diseases do and overtake me entirely, turning me into her evil and as toxic minion. Well, Darkstone is also a 3D top-down slash and hack role-playing, not unlike a more well-known Diablo. It features 4 classes to choose from, so a warrior, thief, wizard and a monk, and they all have their particular specialties of strength, dexterity, magic and vitality respectively. The enemies are varied and same can be said about numerous items you'll get to find. These last are also heavily randomized, making for an enjoyable loop of chasing that next better or possibly even uber item. Uber, Iber, Juber, I really don't know how to say. Anyway, the town that's your hub is more compact and easier to get around than the one in Diablo. Not that the Tristram was difficult, but some locations in it were really spread out. What's most fun about Darkstone, however, as compared to arguably still better Blizzard's classic, is that you don't have to venture alone. You can have an AI companion with you that will complement your set of skills with his, or hers, if they're mixed well that is. So, having a caster with melee fighter in any of the possible combinations is an ideal choice. And while the AI behavioral logic leaves a lot to be desired at times, it's not terrible and you can switch the control between the characters freely at any moment to either quote-unquote help one that got lost or direct him in the right way. One way or another, it's good to have someone watching your back, even if that someone is AI controlled. Something that I think is worth mentioning though is that it's best if you stick to the caster during those more demanding encounters and leave the melee fighter to the PC, as when it's in control of a magic user, it tends to join in the melee fights at times too, which is just not something that any wizard would do. Well, drunk one might in tavern when arguing with someone and not wanting to burn the building to the ground with fireball, but other than that, they usually stay in the back of most fights, casting all kinds of unpleasant spells at the enemies, like Fiery Diarrhea one, or Nasty Breath Curse, or even Inferno Lego Bricks on the ground spell, which, as you know very well, having undoubtedly stepped on one in the past, is one of the most painful and dangerous casts. Anyway, the quests, while typically for the hack and slasher not too deep, are rather interesting, even if linear, and will be fun to follow through and complete. All that, backed with heavily randomized aspect of gameplay, short of levels which seem to be very similar to one another in subsequent playthroughs, make for a very replayable adventure. Story-wise, an evil corrupt monk Drak, after years in magical captivity, managed to free himself, return to the world of Uma, and plans, with use of his life-draining teacher Darkstone, to take it over in a fit of revenge. And as in most cases of situations as dire as this one, you're the only one to stop him. So you'll need to find a way to recreate a mythical time orb and then use it once again to trap Drak in it, saving Uma and its citizens in the process. If you like action role-playing games, especially those in vein of Diablo, Darkstone is definitely worth a playthrough. I'm sure that you'll agree that today's 10 was pretty cool. But did any of them especially spark your interest? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, hit those like and subscribe buttons below, and maybe share it too, it helps more than you know. If you didn't, then don't naturally. It was fun talking to you as usual, and I'll see you, or more accurately, talk to you very soon.